The Harmattan winds had softened that morning, allowing a golden calm to settle over Abuja. The city seemed wrapped in a blanket of fragile peace, as though the heavens themselves had decided to hold back their breath. But beneath the quiet, there was tension, the kind that clings a nation scarred by war, loss, and unanswered questions. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu stood by the wide glass window of the State House, watching the faint swirl of dust that rose from the distant roads. Nigeria was wounded, not by one enemy alone, but by countless nameless shadows. There were villages burned. There were families displaced. There were children who did not understand why the world had turned its back on them. Genocidal attacks carried out by violent extremist groups had carved grief into the nation's soil. Tinubu carried these facts like stones in his chest. Today's meeting was supposed to be quiet, discreet, and shielded from political eyes. The world, after all, was aflame from many directions, conflicts of borders, power, faith, and survival. But behind closed doors, 3 leaders would gather to speak not only as presidents, but as men searching for meaning in times of collapse. The first to arrive was Ibrahim Traoré, the young, fiery leader of Burkina Faso whose anti-colonial stance had made him a living symbol of defiance. His military outfit was surprisingly simple today, a dark traditional Sahelian tunic with embroidered lines that told stories of old kingdoms. His eyes held the intensity of someone who had seen too much too soon and had refused to bow to forces far larger than himself. As he stepped into the reception hall, his presence seemed to thicken the air, like a storm cloud silently gathering strength. Tinubu turned when he heard the footsteps. "Ibrahim," he said softly, extending a hand. Traoré clasped it firmly. "Nigeria is family," he replied, "and I do not turn away from family in pain." There was sincerity there, the kind born from shared battles against unseen hands tightening the strings that tried to rule West Africa. Though separated by borders, both nations faced adversaries shaped from shadows, extremist groups who twisted faith into weapons. But the real surprise of the meeting had not yet arrived. Down the gilded corridor, escorted by Nigerian security officials, walked the Prime Minister of Ukraine, a woman known across the world for her unnerving calm even while her nation stood in the jaws of war. She carried the sorrow of millions displaced, the echoes of sirens, the memory of shattered cities. Yet her eyes still held a light, a strange, stubborn hope that refused to die. Tinubu stepped forward. "Prime Minister, you honor us." She offered a tired but warm smile. "In these times, President Tinubu, no nation suffers alone. Pain travels. Loss travels, but so does faith." Traoré watched her closely, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. A leader of the Slavic North, hardened by snow and artillery, entering the hot, weary heart of West Africa. It was a meeting no prophet could have predicted. They took their seats in a small, secluded chamber lit by warm lamps and guarded by silence thick enough to feel holy. A round table lay between them, bare except for glasses of water and the weight of what was left unsaid. Tinubu spoke first. "You both know why I called this meeting. Nigeria." His voice trembled slightly, not in weakness, but in grief. "We are losing too many. Villages are ending, entire histories wiped overnight by violent extremists who know no mercy. We speak of numbers in the news, but behind every number, a soul." No one interrupted. The room felt suspended in stillness. Tinubu continued, "Our people are asking, where is God? Where is hope? What faith survives when your neighbor disappears in the night? When your land becomes your grave?" Traoré leaned forward slowly. "Faith survives," he said, "when leaders do not run from truth." The Ukrainian Prime Minister folded her hands. "We ask the same questions," she whispered. "Every night, in bunkers. Every morning, under broken skies. We ask not if God exists, but why he is silent." There was a deep, trembling humanity in her words, one that crossed borders, languages, and battles. Traoré inhaled deeply, then rose from his seat. "My brothers, my sister," he began, "permit me to speak as a son of the Sahel, not as a president." He placed his palm on the table, as if grounding himself. "There is a story my grandmother told me, of a country where darkness grew so thick that even the moon refused to shine. In that land, the people prayed and prayed, but the darkness did not go. Until one night, a child stood and said, "Perhaps the darkness is not hiding God. Perhaps it is reminding us that we must carry the light." He turned to Tinubu. "President Tinubu, Christianity is not a religion only. It is a call, a fire. It is the courage to stand in darkness and still believe the sun will rise." His voice deepened, and it is the duty of leaders to become torches. Tinubu felt a chill, as though Traoré had spoken directly into a part of him he kept buried. The Ukrainian PM rose next, drawn by the intensity of the moment. "Your words remind me of something I once heard in a destroyed church in Mariupol," she said. A priest stood in the rubble and said, "Faith is not protection from suffering. Faith is strength to rebuild after suffering." Traoré nodded, eyes glowing. "Yes, because God does not always stop the storm. Sometimes he makes us the storm." Silence followed. Not empty silence, but the kind pregnant with revelation. Tinubu finally spoke. "Then help me understand," he said. "What is Christianity to a nation under genocidal attack? What is faith when my people bury more children than elders?" Traoré's eyes softened. "Faith," he said, "is refusing to surrender your humanity to the darkness that surrounds you." He paused. "And Christianity is the knowledge that Christ himself suffered injustice. He was hunted, betrayed, abandoned. He knows the pain of your people. And he rose not to escape the world's suffering, but to show us it can be transformed." Something shifted in Tinubu, not quite relief, but recognition. Traoré's words were not simple comfort. They were a challenge. But the Ukrainian PM stepped closer to Tinubu's side, her voice gentle but firm. "And you must understand, President, the world is changing. Your nation's pain is not isolated. The attacks in Nigeria, the conflicts in the Sahel, the war in my country, these are not separate storms. They are winds of the same age of turmoil." She touched the table with her fingertips. "And the people are looking to their leaders not for explanations, but for courage." Tinubu inhaled shakily. Traoré walked around the table until he stood behind him. "You lead a giant," he said. "When a giant falls, the world shakes. Nigeria must not fall." His voice grew intense. "If the extremists break Nigeria, they break Africa. If the extremists silence Nigeria, they silence millions who believe in peace. If the extremists destroy Nigeria, they destroy a piece of the world's soul." Tinubu swallowed. These words hit hard, because they were true. Then, like a prophet speaking into the marrow of history, Traoré declared, "Christianity is not weakness. It is resistance. It is not softness. It is strength. And in this age of darkness, God is not asking Nigeria to kneel. He is asking Nigeria to stand." The lamps flickered, as though the room itself trembled. And in that fragile slice of time, 3 leaders, from Africa and Eastern Europe, felt something neither politics nor diplomacy could provide: alignment, purpose, a shared burden, a shared faith in a better dawn. Tinubu exhaled slowly, deeply, as though he had held that breath for months. "Then let us begin," he said, and the story of their alliance, of faith, resilience, and fire, truly began there. The next morning, the sun rose over Abuja like a silent witness. Its light spilled over the city, yet shadows lingered stubbornly in the alleys, the forests, and the villages torn by violence. The air carried the memory of what had happened. Smoke from burnt homes, cries left unanswered, the footprints of those who had vanished into the void created by violent extremist groups. Inside the same secluded chamber where they had met, Traoré, Tinubu, and the Ukrainian Prime Minister resumed their gathering. Today, their discussion was no longer abstract. It was a call to action, a moral strategy forged in the crucible of blood and loss. The horrors Traoré described, villages erased, families annihilated, cultures silenced, were not merely statistics. They were urgent, desperate, and in need of leadership that would act beyond political calculation. Traoré began, his voice both calm and commanding. "We speak of Christianity not only as faith, but as a mandate. In Nigeria, my friends, entire communities have been wiped from the map. The extremists who carry out genocidal attacks thrive on fear, confusion, and the silence of leaders. Christianity calls us to break that silence. Faith is not a shield for comfort, it is a sword for justice. Tinubu leaned forward, rubbing his temple. Ibrahim, you speak boldly. But how can faith confront violence so enormous, so entrenched? Our armies fight them. Yet villages burn. Thousands die. How does Christianity enter this? Are we to fight with swords and prayers? Traoré's gaze was steady. Faith and strategy are not mutually exclusive. Christianity teaches courage in the face of terror. It calls for leaders who will not compromise with evil, yet will act with mercy for those caught in it. It is a leadership that balances strength with sacrifice. Your hands will fight, yes, but your heart must lead. The Ukrainian Prime Minister nodded slowly. I see parallels with my country. Cities shelled, families displaced, children growing up knowing only war. Our leaders often debate military advantage, but we forget the soul of the nation, the fate of the people that survives in quiet corners. The war teaches us that courage must be coupled with humanity, or we become like the extremists themselves. Traoré's voice softened, yet carried a weight that pressed into their consciences. Christianity is not only for those who worship peacefully within cathedrals. It is for those who face violence daily, who see injustice and remain upright. In Nigeria, those who survive these attacks do so because their communities hold together through prayer, mutual aid, and hope. Leadership must nourish that hope, or the fire of destruction will consume everything. Tinubu exhaled, considering the depth of the challenge. Then we are not just defending land, but faith itself, faith made manifest in courage, compassion, and leadership. He looked at Tra, and you say this is what our leadership must become? A living Christianity. Traoré nodded firmly. Exactly. You must model it, speak of it, act it out in every policy, in every humanitarian mission. Where the extremists seek to annihilate, Christianity must build. Where they seek to divide, faith must unify. This is a paradox. Power without sacrifice is tyranny. Faith without action is empty. The Ukrainian Prime Minister, her expression solemn, added, then our collaboration must go beyond diplomacy. If the atrocities in Nigeria can spread, if the extremist ideology migrates with them, our nations are linked in struggle. Our Christian faith, mine, yours, and yours in Africa, can provide a moral compass in this darkness. Traoré rose from his seat and began pacing, gesturing toward a large map of Africa pinned against the wall. Look here. The extremists do not respect borders. They move across countries with impunity, sowing death and terror. Their success lies in exploiting fear, division, and the absence of moral courage. If we do not respond, the blood will never stop flowing. If Christianity is to mean anything in leadership, it must be action, coordinated, courageous, and compassionate action. Tinubu studied the map with a heavy heart. And what form will this action take? Military operations alone cannot end the cycles of violence. We need healing, reconciliation, justice, but also immediate protection for those in danger. Traoré's eyes glimmered. Yes, a three-pronged approach. First, protection. Establish safe zones, humanitarian corridors, and rapid response teams. Second, healing, schools, shelters, and ministries that rebuild lives spiritually and materially. Third, transformation. Teach communities the power of faith lived daily, courage in adversity, and leadership rooted in justice. The Ukrainian Prime Minister leaned forward. It is ambitious, but in our experience, only a vision that unites hearts across borders can endure. The attacks on your villages are a tragedy we cannot ignore. My country knows the pain of children growing up amidst rubble. Faith, when embodied in action, becomes resistance, spiritual, moral, and communal. Traoré smiled faintly. Precisely. Leadership is not just policy. Leadership is living as an example of what is possible when faith meets courage. Tinubu's hands clenched together. And these extremists, their reach is growing. People fear them because they feel God has abandoned them. How do we bring hope when entire communities have been annihilated? Traoré's voice was unwavering. By standing among them, by refusing to yield. Christianity is the courage to be present where others flee. When a village burns, the Christian leader does not just send words of condolence. He sends people aid and unwavering moral clarity. He demonstrates that God's justice is not absent, only delayed. The room fell silent, each leader digesting the enormity of the task. Outside, the wind carried faint echoes from the city below. Children laughing, dogs barking, the stir of life pressing against the shadow of violence. They were reminded that the world continued, indifferent to suffering, yet also resilient, waiting for leadership rooted in faith. Traoré moved closer, speaking directly to Tinubu. Your nation's Christianity is a light that can burn through the darkest clouds, but it requires sacrifice. Your citizens are watching not only your policies, but your soul. Will you act decisively, in alignment with the moral courage Christianity demands, even when it costs political favor or personal comfort? Tinubu felt the weight of responsibility more than ever. I will try, but we cannot succeed alone. What role do you see for your presence here? Traoré, how do we coordinate across borders? Traoré's gaze softened. I am a servant of faith, not of politics. I bring counsel, strategy grounded in compassion, and the moral authority that comes from living a life aligned with Christianity's highest principles. I can guide, inspire, and organize, but your nations must act. Your faith must be visible. Your actions must mirror your words. Tinubu, seated across from him, nodded grimly. I have seen it firsthand. The families torn apart, the children weeping in fields where homes once stood. It is beyond words. His voice faltered for a moment, then steadied. Yet, here we are, speaking of faith and action. How do we begin to heal a nation scarred so deeply? Traoré turned, his gaze piercing. We begin with presence. Christianity is not an abstraction. It is not a philosophy for the comfortable. It is courage made manifest in the lives of those who suffer. To lead in the face of genocide is to bring tangible light into the darkness. The Ukrainian Prime Minister, her hands folded over a worn notebook filled with observations from her war-torn nation, added quietly, My people know what it is to wake to sirens, to flee bombs, to count the missing each night. They ask not for politics, but for care, for a leader who stands with them, not above them. Faith, when expressed through action, can be that care. Traoré nodded, moving to the center of the room. We will build what I call houses of courage, sanctuaries for the afflicted, schools where children learn not only letters but the strength of faith, medical centers where healing restores body and spirit. These places will be symbols of hope, resistance, and Christian courage. Tinubu leaned forward. And you believe such efforts can turn the tide against the extremists? Can hope and faith truly confront such violent darkness? Traoré's eyes glimmered. Hope is a sword that fear cannot touch. Christianity calls us to wield it boldly. When communities see their leaders standing unwavering amidst terror, when they witness aid, protection, and compassion, they understand that the darkness has no claim over them. The Ukrainian Prime Minister added, and the message must extend beyond borders. Our nations, though continents apart, share a moral obligation. Genocide, terror, and destruction are not isolated. They ripple, affecting neighbors, allies, and the conscience of the world. By leading with faith, courage, and action, we inspire not only our nations but the world. Tinubu, his mind turning over the enormity of the task, finally spoke. Then we commit. Nigeria will host houses of courage. Ministries will reach affected areas, providing shelter, education, and spiritual guidance. We will not simply rebuild. We will empower communities to stand resilient against the darkness. Traoré smiled faintly, a rare softness in his intense expression. And I will coordinate. I will ensure that aid reaches the most remote places, that the message of faith is clear, and that these efforts do not serve ambition, but service. The Ukrainian Prime Minister's voice rang with resolve. Ukraine will join. Refugees, displaced citizens, and war survivors will have access to faith-driven programs for healing and education. We will show that leadership can be moral, brave, and sacrificial. Together, the three leaders began drafting a plan, their words weaving a tapestry of action grounded in faith. For hours, they strategized, coordinating humanitarian aid, setting up mobile medical units, developing educational programs, and creating networks for psychological and spiritual support. Every step was aligned with a central truth. Leadership rooted in Christianity's highest principles demanded courage, service, and sacrifice. Traoré paused to look at the two leaders. Remember, this covenant is eternal, not bound by politics or election cycles, but by the lives we touch and the hope we restore. Every child fed, every family sheltered, every soul healed is a testament to our commitment. Tinubu's eyes softened. And the extremists, those who commit atrocities, how do we respond when they strike again? Traoré's voice was calm yet unyielding. We respond with courage, compassion, and unwavering moral clarity. Justice will follow in the proper channels, but our first duty is to protect and restore life. Christianity teaches that vengeance is not ours to claim, mercy and protection are. The Ukrainian Prime Minister nodded. Our combined efforts will serve as a beacon. The world may doubt us. Critics will question our motives, but the power of faith-driven action is greater than politics. It transcends fear. Days turned into weeks as their plan began taking shape. Houses of courage were established in Nigeria's most affected regions, providing shelter, food, and education. Mobile units reached remote villages, offering medical assistance and spiritual guidance. In Ukraine, centers welcomed war refugees, teaching resilience, hope, and moral courage. Traoré traveled tirelessly between both nations, ensuring that aid was distributed equitably and that communities understood the moral foundation of their work. Tinubu and the Ukrainian Prime Minister maintained visibility, not for political gain, but to demonstrate the unwavering commitment of leadership rooted in faith. The extremists continued their attacks, but their power waned as communities fortified themselves with courage, faith, and resilience. The world began to notice not only the humanitarian efforts, but the moral clarity behind them. Faith, embodied in action, became the true weapon against terror. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of crimson and gold, the three leaders gathered atop a hill overlooking a village in Nigeria. Children laughed in the distance, a sound that had been absent for too long. Families walked freely, rebuilding homes, planting gardens, and reclaiming life from the grip of violence. Traoré looked at Tinubu and the Ukrainian Prime Minister. See what courage, faith, and action can achieve? The darkness may persist, but light travels faster, spreads further, and endures longer. Tinubu smiled, a rare softness on his face. Yes, we have seen the power of living faith. Leadership is no longer just about governance. It is about standing with the people, embodying hope, and refusing to yield to fear. The Ukrainian Prime Minister added, and we have witnessed a covenant stronger than any political alliance. Faith and courage unite nations when words alone cannot. Traoré placed a hand on the wooden cross he carried, a symbol of the mission they had embraced. Let this mission continue. Let the houses of courage grow, let hope travel further, and let the world see that faith and action can withstand even the greatest darkness. As the three leaders stood together, the wind carried the scent of flowers, smoke from distant fires, and the quiet, persistent hum of life reclaiming itself. The night was calm, yet vibrant with the promise of renewal, justice, and courage. Traoré turned to the camera as if speaking directly to the audience, his voice both commanding and warm. Faith is not passive. It calls for courage, action, and sacrifice. Wherever you are, you can be part of the light. Stand for justice, protect the vulnerable, and let your leadership, whether in your home, community, or nation, reflect the power of living faith. Tinubu's voice joined, firm and resolute. Do not wait for others to act. Courage and faith begin with one person, one choice, one step forward. Protect what is good, build what is just, and embrace the responsibility that comes with leadership. The Ukrainian Prime Minister smiled, her eyes shining. Together, we can create a world where hope is stronger than fear, where faith manifests in action, where courage conquers darkness. Traoré raised the cross once more. This story is only the beginning. Let it inspire you. Let it remind you that even in the face of terror, genocide, and despair, faith, courage, and action can transform lives. He turned fully toward the audience. If you were moved by this story, if you believe that faith and courage can change the world, then do this. Like this video, share it with those who need hope, and subscribe to our channel. Join us as we explore more stories of faith, leadership, and moral courage. Together, we can light the darkest corners of the world. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the echo of a covenant forged in faith, courage, and unwavering action. And above, the stars shone brightly, as if nodding in approval. The mission had begun, and the world would never be the same.